Right. Yeah. Well, and to give a bit of background on how the whole border dispute arrived to the tribunal, I think it's
Mhm.
important to understand.
Okay, great. So
Also, yeah.
do you mind, should we just turn video off for the moment because the call's running a bit bad?
Sure, that sounds good. One thing that I wanted to ask you, oh, okay, you're recording the interview? Great, yeah.
Is
I
that
wanted
okay?
to ask if we could record the interview. Yeah, that's good. It's all right. So also, if I cut off at some point, it's probably going to be on my end. My internet is a bit unstable, so just a heads up.
All right.
Sure.
So yeah, so
So,
you were saying you wanted to make some video.
sorry, could you say that again, please?
You started saying something and then I interrupted you with the video, but please carry on.
Sure. So to understand a bit of to understand how we arrived to the arbitral tribunal of 1899, I think it's important to understand about how the reclamation came to be in the first place. So I have a little presentation that I'd like to share with you, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So here, can you see it?
Yeah. Oh, amazing.
Okay. Okay. All right. So this is a presentation that was done by a friend of mine, and he gave it to me also to so that I can give presentations on the history of the dispute. So I'm going to give you a bit of a background on the dispute as well. So it all begins with when we talk about the reclamation zone. I'm gonna give you the same presentation I would give to a Venezuelan, basically.
Okay.
So to understand to how we arrive at the reclamation zone, it's usually people just look at it and see that the if you will take the shape of Venezuela and it looks like an elephant or a rhinoceros, depending on how you look at it. And the rear foot, the rear leg is in stripes, and that's how people really look at it. But to understand about how the whole reclamation came to be and why it's even called Esequibo, or more accurately, Guayana Esequiba, we need to look at the history. So Guayana is really a region in the north of South America, which is more or less an island. And I say it's an island because it's bordered by several important rivers in the continent. The Orinoco River at the on the north, this one here, the Amazon River here on the south, the Rio Negro here on the west, and a part of the Rio Casiquiare here on the west as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Rio Casiquiare has an English name. It probably doesn't, so we'll just go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to this day, well, it was in the beginning occupied by several European countries, among them Spain, Portugal, France, the Netherlands, and in the early 19th century, Great Britain.
Yeah.
And today it's occupied by Venezuela, Brazil, Guyana, Brazil, Suriname, and France still.
Mm-hmm.
So we arrive at why the part of Venezuela. Well, firstly, when the Spanish explorers arrived to the New World, this man here on the left, Don Juan de Esquivel, was the first European to sail the Esequibo River here on the easternmost part of the map you see here.
Yeah.
This red line is the whole Esequibo River, and the river was called after him, Esequibo, Esquivel. Then, when the Captaincy General of Venezuela was formally created in the 8th of September of 1777, the province of Guayana, which included all this southernmost area,
Mm-hmm.
included what was I going to say? It stipulated that the Esequibo River was the easternmost border with the Dutch Guiana at the time. And the Dutch were the ones occupying the lefternmost part of the river.
Yeah.
After 1814, the Dutch ceded Esequibo to the Dutch ceded Esequibo to, not the Esequibo, they ceded the colonies of Berbice, Demerara, and Esequibo to the British, which is this gray area here. And the British fused these three colonies to create British Guiana. And it was the area, this is the Esequibo River here in the middle, and this was British Guiana at the time. So Venezuela, as you know, I'm guessing you read a little bit of Colombian history. Venezuela and Colombia were were once upon a time the same country. Then Venezuela seceded in 1830. And they approached the British with the intent of now being an independent nation, of saying, well, the Esequibo River had always been the natural boundary between Spain and the Netherlands. So let's now now that you are our new neighbors and we're a country, let's again say that the Esequibo River is a natural boundary, which would be in the line here. And the British, they agreed to these negotiations and hired this guy on the left called Robert Schomburg to explore the area and put these border posts in what would be to say this, from this part here is Venezuelan, from that part there is British Guiana.
Yeah.
In 1835, he arrives at South America, starts exploring the area, and here in the northernmost part of the Esequibo, he finds that it's sparsely populated, and he decides to put these how do you say border? You know the word hito, fronterizo?
People, no.
Hito. Basically, these border markers. That's
Okay.
the word I was looking for. These markers. He puts these markers at the northernmost part of the territory, and essentially adjudicates this land in red to Britain in 1835. So Venezuela protests to the British, and the British reply that this was just a provisional line. This does not mean we're adjudicating anything, and of course the border negotiations are still open, and they, in a measure of good faith, they order Schomburg to remove the markers. So for intents of this presentation, let's just pretend that this land goes back, turns white again.
Okay.
However, the 19th century was a period of political instability and internal strife for Venezuela. And the Britain, being the foremost imperial power of the time, took advantage of that weakness on our part to start encroaching on the territory. And by 1841, they publish a new line, which is as follows, which adjudicated to them the following territory and red. Now, this whole land is more than 100,000 square kilometers. Venezuela had always said that the natural boundary would be the blue line, the Esequibo River. In Britain, what they reply now was that the Dutch, before the British became our new neighbors, the Dutch during colonial times had tried had come to the river to the Spanish side and built a few settlements. But each and every time the Spanish had dislodged them, and their settlements didn't last more than a few years before they were dislodged, and they were each and every time. So the British, their argument was now that, well, since we are the new owners of the colonies of Esequibo, Demerara, and Berbice, we now claim, we can now say that we can claim ownership of the territory west of the Esequibo River. So Venezuela, what we're willing to negotiate with you is a boundary from where's the marker here? From this line to the west, because all the area in red we take for granted that is already ours. Venezuela protests this. There are several negotiations to split the land through the middle, relatively. And these negotiations went nowhere because neither side wanted to give up what they claimed was theirs. So in around 1850, Venezuela and Britain reach an agreement whereby they say, okay, Britain, you will not occupy any more land to the west of more than what you have already, which is still under reclamation. And Venezuela, you will not populate any area near the border, the de facto, the provisional border. And we will keep the status quo as it is until we reach an agreement. So, and that was in 1850, but shortly after, the British find these gold mines around here in the center of the Esequibo, in the area called Uruari. And these the British find these mines. These mines are discovered, and the British settlers, say that we want to take over these mines, and they start crossing the line, and the Venezuelans to watch this happen and say, well, we're not going to stay behind and watch them just take more land. So they start occupying the area as well. Nonetheless, Venezuela underwent several government changes at the time and internal strife at the time, and we even had our own civil war, although not for slavery. And by the time the negotiations are resumed, it's in 1876, 1875, during the government of Antonio Guzman Blanco of Venezuela, when the British published a third Schomburg line, which looked like this. So all this land here, what Britain claimed as theirs. The British then, at this point, President Guzman Blanco, seeing that the negotiations for the past 30 years have led nowhere, decides to break diplomatic relations with Britain and starts turning to the United States to call for their aid by appealing to the Monroe Doctrine. The United States at this time was vigilant of the matter, but they decided to remain on the sidelines. Finally, in 1887, the British published a final line, which was the extreme boundary, which was all this area in red. This is 200,000 square kilometers. And at this point, their objective becomes more evident in that Britain wanted to take control of the mouth of the Orinoco River. And why would they want to do that? Well, because the Orinoco River is a navigable river. It's quite large as well, and it allows entry to. If you sail through the Orinoco River and through its affluents, you can get all the way to Bogota. You can sail all the way down to the Amazon River, and whoever owns one of the main waterways of the continent, can essentially control the whole northern part of South America. Now, the United States, being much more developed and powerful, formally decides to enter the reclamation, and through their Secretary of State, Richard Olney, and their ambassador to London, called George Gresham, I believe, they basically tell the Great Britain that you guys need to sit down and to an arbitration with the Venezuelans, or we, the United States, will create our own commission to find which is the true border between Britain and Venezuela, and we will implement all the measures in our disposal to put the border where it should be. And among those measures at their disposal was even war. So Britain at this point, this was in 1890s, in the 1890s, yes. At this point, they say, okay, we will go to arbitration, but we will do so with certain conditions. And these conditions would be contemplated in the Treaty of Washington of 1897. The Treaty of Washington, among its most it had several clauses which favored the British, but among the ones that stand out most are the fact that Venezuela would have no direct representation. And they wouldn't have direct representation because at the time, let's remember that it was the 1890s, there was the whole white man's burden thing going on. And well, what the British basically said was, the Venezuelans come from a country that is poor, underdeveloped, and politically unstable, and they're not, yeah, we don't consider them a valid counterpart with whom to sit down and settle on a border. We only consider the United States to be that valid interloper. So the Treaty of Washington would say Venezuela would be represented by two judges from the U.S. Supreme Court, which would be these two guys, Melville Weston Fuller and David Josiah Brewer. And on the British side, they would have direct representation through Richard Collins and the Baron Russell of Pillowan. And there would also be a fifth judge, who was this Russian guy, Frederick de Martins, who would be the neutral judge in theory.
Yeah.
And I say neutral judge because the verdict of the arbitral tribunal would be settled via through vote. So each judge would have one vote, and if the two sides to break a stalemate, to break a tie, the neutral judge would vote for one side or the other.
Yeah.
Okay. So has everything I wanted to ask you, have I explained myself properly? Is everything that I've said being clear?
Yep, makes sense.
Okay. So the arbitral award, the arbitral tribunal starts its operations in 1897 in Paris, and 2 years later, on the 3rd of October, it emits the following verdict. So Venezuela once again claimed that the natural boundary would be at the Esequibo River. Britain claimed all the territory, the 200,000 square miles, up to and what is the mouth of the Orinoco as well. The map I sent earlier, I showed you earlier.
Yeah.
And the arbitral award, the verdict it gives is that the border between Venezuela and British Guiana would be the line in red that you see here.
Yeah.
This verdict basically adjudicated to Britain 90% of the territory in dispute, while leaving Venezuela with 10% of the territory, but with exclusive control over the mouth of the Orinoco. This one feature that stood out, for which the arbitral award of Paris stands out, is because it was the first arbitral tribunal in history to emit a verdict unanimously. In other words, the 5 judges in the tribunal voted in favor of this red line that you see here.
Okay.
Okay, so Venezuela, but this is where it gets good. The story gets good right here.
Yeah, confused, yeah.
Okay. Venezuela widely considered this tribunal to be unfair, and what the United States told us was, listen, this is the best that you're going to get. If you're not going to accept the verdict, then you go and figure it out with Britain on your own. And Venezuela, given the 50 years of negotiations, of fruitless negotiations that we had earlier, we decided, well, okay, we'll just take the deal, whatever. They take the deal, but for many years Venezuela protested and made several declarations from 1899 all the way to the 1960s, where they manifestly expressed that they considered the arbitral award to be unjust. Finally, in 1962, Venezuela, in the General Assembly of the United Nations, denounces the arbitral award of 1899 to be null and void due to several findings that they had found regarding its verdict. among the findings that discovered was the memorandum from Severo Malet Prevost. I don't have a picture of him here, but he was one of the lawyers
Yeah.
on the side of the Venezuelans who issued this memorandum saying that the Russian guy, Frederick de Martins, had basically coerced both sides to accept his compromise line, the red line that you saw earlier. Basically, what he went to the Americans in private and said, listen, you guys are not getting anywhere in your negotiations with the British, and the tribunal is dragging on forever. So I'm going to propose my own compromise line, compromise, quote unquote. And if you do not accept it, then I will vote in favor of the British, and they will get all the 200,000 square kilometers, and including the mouth of the Orinoco.
Okay.
Okay. Then he went privately to the British and said to them, listen, you guys are getting nowhere in your negotiations with the Americans, ergo the Venezuelans, and I'm going to propose my own compromise line. And if you do not vote in favor of my line, then I will vote in favor of the Venezuelans and give them all the territory up to the Esequibo River.
Okay.
Both sides being coerced they were coerced, and that's why they voted in favor of the Martins line, and that's why the arbitral award is the first, and I believe the only arbitral award in history to be voted unanimously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Moreover, the story of Severo Malet Prevost was also confirmed in a letter sent by one of the British judges in the tribunal to the British PM at the time, incidentally on the 10th of October of 1899, that is 1 week later, basically detailing the same story, that the Martins came to us and made us this offer that we couldn't refuse, and I have the feeling that he's made the same offer to the Americans.
Who was the person that wrote that letter?
Sorry?
Who was the person that wrote that letter?
The person that wrote that letter, I do not have the name at this moment, but I can get it to you right after we finish the interview. Does that work?
Yeah, perfect.
Sure. Okay. Then among the other irregularities found was that the arbitral tribunal did not emit any. So every court, when it issues a verdict, it gives the list of reasons on which it founded its verdict. The arbitral tribunal of 1899 did not produce those motives. It also exceeded its powers in the form of declaring that the Cuyuni River, let me show you on the map. The Cuyuni River is this river here. It's I don't know if you can see the name right there.
Okay, yeah, I see your map.
Okay. So the arbitral tribunal declared that the Cuyuni River would be an international river, navigable by anyone, and that was an excessive power because the tribunal did not have the competency to make that call. They couldn't make that call, and not only that, but they also took territory from Brazil in the process. And in fact, on the 3rd of the arbitral tribunal issued its verdict on the 3rd of October of 1899, and 5 years later, Britain was undergoing another arbitral tribunal with Brazil that was mediated by the King of Italy, whereby the Brazilians protested that the border drawn by the arbitral tribunal of Paris had adjudicated this land here to Britain, and it had no power to do that. And eventually, the tribunal, that new border, the award between Britain and Brazil basically split the land through the middle, but that was also an excess of power that the tribunal was in no capacity of doing. So between the memorandum of Severo Malet Prevost, the irregularities I just mentioned, Venezuelan's Secretary of Foreign Relations, Minister of Foreign Relations, Marcos Falcón Briceño, this man that you see here, declared in the General Assembly that the arbitral award would now be considered by Venezuela null and void. So that was in 1962, and 4 years later, after Venezuela shows all the mountain of evidence that they had found, not only that Esequibo was first Spanish, then Venezuelan, but also that the arbitral award was illegitimate, we arrive at the Geneva Agreement of 1966, which recognizes that Venezuela has a dispute on the verdict issued by the arbitral award. It stipulates that a mixed commission will be created to the contention that Venezuela has over the verdict, that Guyana, which was soon to achieve its region's independence, would become part of the tribunal, that no act or activity in the area in dispute would serve to increase or decrease the rights of one or another party over the territory, and that it contemplates apart from the mixed commission, it also contemplates the mechanisms of conflict resolution contained in Article 33 of the UN Charter to solve the dispute. So Venezuela once again claims the Esequibo River as a natural boundary, and it's from the 1960s that in Venezuela you start seeing these maps with the striped area.
Yeah.
So that was in February of 1966. 3 months later, Guyana achieves its independence and becomes transforms from the colony of British Guiana to Guyana. As you see here in the picture, Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And Venezuela recognizes the new country, but with reservations. We say that this territory in green, that is all the territory east of the Esequibo River, is what we consider Guyana, because all the territory west, that is the land in blue, is under reclamation.
Yeah.
Venezuela, now here's where the issues begin, because there is a fundamental difference in the interpretation of the goal of the Geneva Agreement. Venezuela says that the Geneva Agreement was created to set aside the verdict of the arbitral award, given all the evidence that we have found, and that for this reason, the mixed commission and the whole goal of the Geneva Agreement is to settle a new boundary between Guyana and Venezuela. Guyana, on the other hand, says that the goal of the agreement is for Venezuela to prove that the arbitral award is null and void. Now, and because of that difference in interpretations, the negotiations of the mixed commission, which was set to last for 4 years, go nowhere.
No.
And Venezuela at this point starts looking for other means to recuperate that territory. And well, there are incidents like the occupation of Anacoco Island, where I occupied that territory, and Guyana protested it. And at this point, Venezuela what says to Guyana, listen, Guyana denounces Venezuela to the international community. The international community says to Guyana, you have a mixed commission specifically created to solve your border dispute with Venezuela, so take your issue to the mixed commission. And in the mixed commission, Venezuela was waiting for them to say, listen, what I'm here is to settle a new boundary with you, Guyana, and if you're going to claim the Anacoco Island from us, then that is essentially a derecognition of the arbitral award, of the verdict of the arbitral award. So that would mean, yeah, that if you're going to claim the island, that essentially means you do not recognize the verdict of the arbitral award.
Okay.
There is also the Rupununi, the rebellion of Rupununi, which took place in early 1969, which was an attempt by several by these landowners in the southern part of the Esequibo to secede from Guyana and join Venezuela, and which failed. And finally, because the tensions got so high at that point, given that Venezuela had aided the rebels, we got the Protocol of Port Spain, which essentially froze negotiations for 12 years. It had the goal of calming tensions, and also it sought for Venezuela and Guyana to become closer through trade agreements. And while trade did increase, the issue of the Essequibo was always latent. It was always the elephant in the room, if you will. Yeah. And also at this point, Guyana starts trying to give out these concessions to exploit the abundant natural resources of the Essequibo, which Venezuela protested vehemently and successfully as well. In fact, the Essequibo, up until a few years ago, was essentially a forest. And after the Protocol of Port Spain expires in June of 1982, the negotiations resume, this time not under a mixed commission, but under the good offices. The good officer is, I don't know if you know, but the good officer is essentially a person designated by the Secretary of the UN, Secretary General of the UN, to ensure that the parts that the two countries who are at conflict sit down and have a dialogue.
Yeah.
However, the good officer's responsibilities do not include ensuring that the two parts reach an agreement. So if they sit down and get nowhere or just yell at each other, well, that's really beyond him. Mm-hmm. From 1989 all the way to 2014, we had 4 good officers, all of them from the English-speaking Caribbean. And finally, our last good officer was this man, Dag Nylander, from Norway, who was a good officer for only 1 year after the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon decided that, given that Venezuela and Guyana were at the time deciding on what mechanism, conflict resolution mechanism to choose, he said the following: well, Venezuela wants the good officer, but Guyana wants to go straight to the ICJ. So what I will do is I will have 1 more year of good officer, that is this guy, Dag Nylander.
Yeah.
And if in that 1 year there are no significant advancements made, then I will submit the matter to the ICJ unless both Venezuela and Guyana ask me to do otherwise. The year goes by, Dag Nylander submits his report, and thereafter Ban Ki-moon submits the issue to the ICJ. Or, well, he decides he's not Ban Ki-moon, but Antonio Guterres. This was early last year, 2018. Antonio Guterres submits the matter to the ICJ, and Guyana formally puts its claim that its request that the ICJ declare itself competent to decide on the matter and present its claims that Venezuela needs to recognize among other things, that Venezuela needs to recognize the arbitral award of 1899 as legitimate. And well, this is mostly just explaining how, well, just to give you a bit of a background. Venezuela, as I said, had protested each and every one of the concessions given by Guyana to transnational companies to exploit the natural resources. And it had done so successfully until Chavez, in a trip he did to Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, in 2004, declared that Venezuela would Venezuela would no longer oppose any unilateral concessions given by Guyana, so long as they were for the benefit of the inhabitants of the Esequibo, which are, under the Venezuelan constitution, considered Venezuelan citizens by birth. Guyana took this declaration as a carte blanche, or a blank check, to give all the concessions it could to basically anyone, and that's when the real the real penetration of different transnational companies begins. Transnational companies from Brazil, from the US, from China, from Canada, from Australia, and all that while Venezuela remained silent. However, there were several incidents in which tensions did get a bit high. Namely, for example, the detainment of this ship called the Technic Perdana, which had been hired by the American oil company called Anadarko to explore the area. And when the Venezuelan Coast Guard detained the ship, what they replied was that they were there under a concession given to them by Guyana. The Venezuelan Coast Guard said that no, these waters are Venezuelan, and you need to come with us to Guyana, to Margarita, and where they were detained for a few days. Also, that was in 2015, or no, in 2013. Then in 2015, Venezuela protested Guyana's request to extend its maritime platform, whereby they would essentially take over or be legal all the territorial sea, or all the maritime territory. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but basically all this, the sea of the Esequibo would be legally adjudicated to Guyana. Venezuela also protested that. And after that point, Guyana starts, and especially with the new government of David Granger, who is the current president at this moment, starts shifting away from saying, let's keep the good offices, to let's go to the ICJ, which is where the reclamation is now. The ICJ has received the claims of Guyana, and Venezuela has also declared that it does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ, and that the ICJ is not the competent organ to solve this issue, and calls for Guyana to come back to bilateral negotiations. And the ICJ is currently deciding if it's competent or not. And that's it.
Okay, so why does Venezuela think that the ICJ is not a competent organ for this?
So the Article 33 of the UN Charter specifically lists the several conflict resolution mechanisms. Let me stop sharing here one moment. Among them are, let me Google them for you right now.
Is that the one that said that the agreement had to be resolved between an organ that is decided by, or that is agreeable to both parties, like Venezuela and Guyana?
Sorry, could you say that again, please?
There's something I read about in one of the agreements, that the dispute had to be resolved by an organization that is agreed by both Venezuela and by Guyana. So by Guyana taking it to the ICJ, and Venezuela doesn't want it, then even if the ICJ does make a decision, then it will still be null and void, because Venezuela never agreed for the ICJ to be a part of it.
Well, yes. I mean, there are many issues with the whole thing of the ICJ. Firstly, the UN Secretary General does not have the power to unilaterally decide the issue is going to the ICJ. First of all.
Okay.
Secondly, as you said, Venezuela does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ to solve its issues with other countries, and never has recognized it. Venezuela has categorically declared several times that we have never, and we will never recognize the ICJ. And also the Article 33 of the UN Charter, let me share that with you. It's in Spanish, but
that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, here it is. Article 33 of the UN Charter says the following. Las partes en una controversia cuya continuación sea susceptible de poner en peligro el mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad internacionales, tratando de buscarle solución ante todo mediante la negociación, investigación, mediación, conciliación y el arbitraje, el arreglo judicial, el recurso a organismos o acuerdos regionales u otros medios pacíficos de elección. Now, what Venezuela says, listen, we cannot go straight to a judicial arrangement or arreglo judicial,
Mm.
basically a judicial settlement, because the Article 33 of the UN Charter lists the whole conflict resolution mechanisms as you just read.
Yeah.
If they just wanted to go straight to the judicial agreement or settlement, then they would just say we would seek a solution via delete all this part, judicial settlement.
But hasn't.
Venezuela says, yeah.
But I understand they tried the arbitraje and that didn't work. But there has been mediation for 4 years, no, and that hasn't worked.
No, not really, because a mediator is a person who tries to, as per the UN, a mediator is a person who not only gets both parties to sit down and reach a solution, but also proposes something in between. So does his best for the two parties to reach an agreement. The good officer, let's say you and I have an issue. The good officer, and a technically impartial third party, would just arrange for us to have a meeting, and if we yell at each other for 1 hour straight, well, that's beyond him. If we don't reach an agreement, that's beyond him, and that's not mediation. That's
His
good
job is
office.
just to get two people in the same room.
Yeah, the whole goal of the good officer and his whole responsibility is to get the parties in the same room to have a dialogue.
Okay.
If the dialogue goes nowhere, then that's beyond him, and that is why it's not a mediation.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so for you, what do you think that could be done to, obviously the ICJ isn't the answer for Venezuela, what could be done to help solve this dispute?
Well, I think that we could move to one of the other mechanisms of conflict resolution contemplated in Article 33. Let's go to a mediation, a formal mediation, or one of the other ones listed before judicial settlement, which is how it should be.
Yeah.
That's what I think we should do.
Who do you think would be a good organism to mediate this?
Well, I know a good organism to mediate. Well, mediator doesn't have to be necessarily an organism. It could be a person who has experience in actually mediating,
Yeah.
valga la redundancia. And I say this because, as I said before, 3 out of the 4 good officers that we have had have been from the English-speaking Caribbean. Guyana was a British colony.
Yeah.
So, and CARICOM, which is the organization of all the former British colonies in the Caribbean, has unequivocally and categorically supported Guyana in its reclamation against Venezuela.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, is the guy really impartial or not?
Yeah. Okay, and within the Article 33, do you think that that is an interpretation to say that that list of negotiation, investigation, mediation should be done in that order? Or because it doesn't say, for example, first try negotiation, then try investigation, then mediation.
Well, then why put them? It's like I said before, why not just take this whole part? Mediante la negociación, delete all that line up the way to arbitrage and say arreglo judicial.
But yeah, but
yes.
Articles need to be clear. So for me, if I were writing it, I would say first this, then that, then the other, and having them in that list makes it open to interpretation.
Right, but I mean, let's look at the nature of each or one of the mechanisms. Negociación, investigación, mediación, conciliación. It moves from the bilateral plane. Each one of the first 4 mechanisms is strictly bilateral.
Yeah.
And then, and the article is designed that way because it says, well, if we can reach an agreement through one of the bilateral means, then we go straight to involving a third impartial party, an impartial third party, to settle the matter. usually through a Solomonic decision. If they just wanted to do, and the spirit of that is that so both parties can reach an agreement through themselves.
Yeah.
If they just wanted to go straight to getting a Solomonic decision, which is what usually happens in these judicial settlements, and they just would go to arbitrage or judicial settlement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because mediation and arbitration also would involve that impartial third party.
Yes, but the arbitration, the arbiter decides and his decision is usually final. The mediator proposes a decision and both parties need to agree to it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's the difference.
That makes sense. Okay, and do you think that the element of gold mines and oil has made both parties more more desperate to keep this land, or do you think it's more of a sense of pride that they want it, or what would you say was behind this?
Well, the discovery, it has long been known that the Esequibo has abundant natural resources and flora and fauna. There
Yeah.
are pictures of the Esequibo where they show you that the land is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
However, the discovery mostly of oil and of oil among other things, but surely of oil, I would say that has made Guyana more desperate to formally take control of the territory and say this is only mine and I am not budging. Because why would Venezuela? I mean, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, proven oil reserves.
Yeah.
So if the argument is Venezuela wants this because they want oil, well, no, we already have oil, an area that in a land that is undisputably ours. So that would be to say that we want it because we want oil. Well, I mean that's from my standpoint that's fallacious. And we also have abundant mineral reserves as well in land that is undisputably Venezuelan. So to claim that the whole reclamation from the Venezuelan side is because of natural resources is really it's an argument that the Guyanese would give to say that you see the Venezuelans want to bully us and they want to steal our land. That's us.
So for Venezuelans, it's a sense of pride and a sense of righteousness in the fact that they believe that the arbitral award is null and void.
Is null and void, and also that it was ours back from the Spanish from when we were part of Spain. It's ours by right, and because the arbitral award was null and void, is null and void.
Mm-hmm. And what about the people who live in this disputed territory? Have there been any polls? Because obviously I'm British, so I've heard a lot about the Falkland Islands, and one of the issues with the Falkland Islands is that the people who live there unanimously vote to remain part of Britain, despite the fact that historically it has always been part of Argentina.
Right.
So have there been any polls or any questioning of the people who live there? Do they want to be part of Guyana, or do they want to be part of Venezuela? Should that be a factor in this decision?
There has never been a referendum for the people of the Esequibo to decide if they want to be Venezuelan, Guyanese, or their own country. What I can tell you is that up until before Venezuelan economic crisis, there were thousands and thousands of Esequibians and Guyanese migrating to Venezuela. In fact, one of my friends whom I work on the issue because I've delved into the matter of the reclamation for 10 years now. He is from the Ciudad Ordaz, which is in the southern part of Venezuela. And he tells me there are Guyanese and Esequibians there by the thousands. And they came to Venezuela precisely because Guyana has pretty much always been in an economic crisis. In fact, up until I believe since its independence, Guyana has lost a great percentage of its population to migration. and to suicide. So that on the one hand, and on the other hand, the people of the Esequibo are they're predominantly Native Americans. Now Guyana, I don't know if you know this, is a country that has unfortunately been divided by racism between blacks and Indians from India. I want to make the distinction
Yeah.
so that and when the Indians represent 50 plus percent of the population, the blacks represent 40 plus percent, and the remainder is divided between Native Americans, Chinese, and whites.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Indians and the blacks get tired of picking on each other, and when I say picking on each other, is that the political parties in Guyana are divided on racial lines. Like this is the party of the Indians and this is the party of the blacks. They start picking on the natives. And yeah, well, what does this have to do with the poll? Well, it depends on where on at what point you would have asked. If you would have asked a few years ago, maybe the Esequibians would have voted to be part of Venezuela. Maybe not so much now because Venezuela is in an economic crisis. But also, would they vote to be part of Guyana, considering that the government treats them so harshly? And I say treats them harshly because the concession that Georgetown has given to these transnational companies to exploit the national resources basically just bulldoze the environment and the natives who are in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, because it seems that if it is this population of Native Americans in this Esequibo region, that they would neither feel Guyanese nor Venezuelan.
Yeah, probably.
And what language do they speak? Do they speak English or Spanish?
Well, it depends on where you go. If you go to the areas close to the states of Bolivar or del Tamacuro, they speak Spanish. I know for a fact because I went to a town called Bang back in 2013. They spoke Spanish, English, and Portuguese as well. In fact, the stores had sold products that I know from here in Venezuela. Chocolates, food, the harina pan. Have you seen harina pan there in Colombia?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, maybe, I'm guessing you have Colombian friends, right? Tell them to show you a bag of harina pan from Venezuela, and they'll probably know what it is. We use it to make arepas. So
yes, the harina. Sorry, I was
yeah. So what I was saying was depends on where you go. It depends on where you go. If the people speak Spanish, speak English, speak Portuguese, the people of the Esequibo also speak their native American tongue.
Yeah.
That could be Arawak or Kimon or Toshao.
Yeah.
If you go to the Esequibo, to the side of the Esequibo River, then they'll probably speak Spanish. No, I mean English. And also the Guyanese government has done has gone to great lengths to make the Venezuelans seem as invaders. Basically, like I said before, they want to make us seem as bullies and thieves who just want to take their land and also use the black legend of Spain to say that the Spanish killed all the natives. What do you think they're going to do to you? Which is also false because black legend is exactly that, a legend and nothing more. And well, yeah, the people of the Esequibo, well, they maybe would not feel Venezuelan at this moment because of what the Guyanese government has done to make us look bad. But I wouldn't say they would feel Guyanese, again, given how poorly the Guyanese government has treated them and is treating them.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, no, because I find it strange that there has not been a referendum to look at the people who actually live there. Do you think that would, if it came out unanimously they're voting to be part of Venezuela or unanimously voted to be part of Guyana, do you think that would be a a very useful tool in mediation?
I don't know if it would be a useful tool because, I mean, the people of the Falklands or Malvinas Islands, you said they voted unanimously to be part of. Buenos Aires recognize the validity of that referendum?
I don't actually know, to be honest. I'd have to look that up.
Sorry?
I'm not sure. I would have to research that. I can let you know.
Well, no, they don't. That's why the Falklands, the Argentinians are still in dispute. And they don't recognize the referendum because they say, oh, of course you're going to want a referendum with people who have lived in the islands you stole from us for 100 years. And they of course have lived under your rule. They speak your language. I mean, you placed your people on the islands you stole from us, and then you held a referendum to see if they wanted to be part of you. That's what the Argentinians are saying is, listen, you can throw whatever referendum you want, but that's really self-dealing. And the referendum at this point, given how the Guyanese government has made the Venezuelans look bad, would also be a bit of self-dealing, in my opinion, because the Guyanese the Esequibians would say, well, the Guyanese government treats us bad, but according to them, the Esequibians are just simply going to kill us. So who are we going to vote for?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And so currently the people who live in that area, are they given citizenship, Guyanan citizenship or Venezuelan citizenship? How does that work?
The people of the Esequibo are in principle given Guyanese citizenship. However, they have to travel all the way to Georgetown to get their citizenship. And let me show you here in the map. Are you seeing the presentation?
No, but I understand that Georgetown is a long way away.
Yeah, it's a long way away, and in a land where there's barely any infrastructure.
So does that mean that the majority of people don't actually have a citizenship at all?
Well, yeah, it could very well mean that, because it's simply too hard to get.
Yeah.
And life in Guyana and the Esequibo controlled by Guyana is so hard that it also explains why Guyana has had a negative population growth rate for 20 plus years.
Yeah. Okay, so what made you volunteer to tell people about the Esequibo region in the first place?
Well, this all started 10 years ago.
Okay.
I've always been interested in the topic of Venezuelan border settlements and our border dispute with the Esequibo. And after researching on the topic, I personally considered it as a huge wrong that was done to us, and something that I could do something to correct, a wrong to be corrected.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for which I wanted to tell people about this is because since Chavez took power, essentially, there has been a lot of misinformation on the matter, with people saying that they believe that after Chavez's declaration, or when he said that we will no longer oppose the concessions, people believe they have the misconception that Chavez gave away the Esequibo, and that the reclamation is over, which is nothing further from the truth. The reclamation is still active, and what Chavez did was a mistake, but the reclamation is still active to this day.
Yeah.
And the reason for which I want to tell people is to let them know about this topic, and to educate them on the matter, so that they become knowledgeable on the topic, recognize that the Esequibo is ours, and through pressure from society, the government is pushed to take the right measures on the reclamation.
Okay. So pressure from society and also taking it out of the ICJ and getting an external mediator. There are things that could help resolve the situation.
Sorry, you said that who doesn't think that the mediator couldn't help?
No, I'm saying a way to resolve the situation you believe could be that pressure from society, taking the case out of the ICJ and involving a third party mediator.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that could be the way to go. So the part of social pressure on the government would be more on the Venezuelan side because since 2004 and with all and although Guyana gave all the concessions it wanted, the Venezuelan government was largely silent on the matter, which didn't work in our favor.
Yeah.
And the social pressures to is basically telling them, hey, get it together and do what you got to do.
Okay, I see. Perfect.
Yeah.
And do you have a potential time frame where you think that this might be resolved, or a hopeful idea maybe, or do you think that it will ever be resolved?
Well, I don't think it's going to be resolved in the ICJ.
Okay.
And I don't think it will because I've spoken to several experts on the matter and people knowledgeable on the topic, and they tell me that the ICJ is going to declare itself incompetent to solve the dispute, among other things, because Venezuela does not recognize the border, the jurisdiction, because the Secretary General doesn't have the right to simply submit the matter to them, because Guyana, which is something that they have cleverly kept silent, they do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ. They simply say, let's go to the ICJ because it's one of the mechanisms of conflict resolution contemplated in Article 33, which I showed you, and because more importantly, you can't force one of the parties in the dispute to go to the ICJ if they don't want to.
Yes, I mean it can be done. It is legal for the ICJ to carry out a dispute with only one party present.
Right.
So that's my question there, but I can't remember whether it was in the Geneva Agreement where it stipulates that the issue has to be resolved with an organization that is acceptable to both parties, which is why the ICJ would.
I think I know what you mean. I mean, it means it has to reach a solution that is practical, peaceful, and mutually acceptable to all the parties.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the mutually acceptable thing.
Exactly. So forcing Venezuela to go to the ICJ is obviously not acceptable for us.
Yeah.
That would be a violation of the Geneva Agreement.
And so what did you say when you meant Guyana doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ? Is that because
Guyana has not signed a single treaty where they say that they recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ to solve their disputes? You see, they're not part of, for example, of the Treaty of Bogota, which says the Treaty of Bogota, the Pact of Bogota says, in case of a conflict between the signatory parties, we pledge to solve our matters through the ICJ.
Oh, okay.
And that is why, for example, Colombia and Nicaragua settled their issues via the ICJ. Then the verdict worked against Colombia's favor and they dropped out. But in principle, that's what the Bogota Pact says. Guyana is not part of that pact, neither is Venezuela. Guyana is not part of any of those pacts. They simply say, let's go to the ICJ, even though we don't recognize it, because a verdict issued by the ICJ is final. And it's final, and it's written on rock until the end of days, written on stone until the end of days.
Yeah.
So they say, if we go to the ICJ and they settle in our favor, then the matter is done. And even if we get not all the land, but at least half the land, which although let it be clear, they want the whole Esequibo. But they say, if we get all Esequibo or at least half of it, then we have the issue is over and we can focus on developing Guyana.
Yeah. Okay. What benefits would Venezuela get from getting even part of the Esequibo region?
Well, the Esequibo is that represents practically the unobstructed gateway, or let me rephrase that. The Esequibo represents Venezuela, their unobstructed access to the Atlantic Ocean. That on one part, and what benefits would they get? Well, they would reclaim of course, would be correcting a wrong that was done to us, and well, of course, the natural resources in the region. But I want to reiterate the reason for the reclamation is not natural resources. It's because a wrong was done to us.
Yeah. Okay. But with regards to the access to the Atlantic, Venezuela still has access to the Orinoco rivers. Is that true?
Yeah, Venezuela has full and total access to the Esequibo, to the Orinoco River and the mouth of the Orinoco. However, what Guyana wants is not only with the ICJ, is not only for the ICJ to recognize their full sovereignty over the region, but also they want to, I can't show it to you on the map, but they basically want to draw the maritime border in a way that closes our access to the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to the. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. That's been really interesting. Give me a lot more information on the subject.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. At the moment, I'm just looking at some more information, doing some more research, and I'm going to talk to my editor on Monday about whether we can do another article or something like that, giving the Venezuelan side.
Okay, sure, sounds good. If you don't mind me asking you, how is it that you moved to Colombia from prison?
Good question. I don't really know. I studied French and Spanish at university and always wanted to move to Latin America.
Good.
And yeah, asked lots of people what their favorite city in Latin America was, and loads of people said Medellin, Colombia, and so I came here.
Good. Do you like it?
I love it. I'm actually moving back to the UK this Christmas, but I've been here for 2 years and I've absolutely loved it.
Great. Yeah. I mean, the weather in Medellin, I bet you, is better than in London.
Oh, I'm not excited to go back to cold rain.
The weather and the food.
Yes.
Well, yes. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today, Frances. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for your time.
And,
We'll stay in touch.
yeah, I hope that you enjoyed the interview, and that that the whole speech I gave you was good and instructive and not too boring.
No, it was very interesting. Don't worry. Yeah,
All right.
thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.